Aloha. Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and today's title is America's New Reverse Brain Drain. What effect will it have on science and the economy? Uh, you know, recently the Trump administration has done it again. They are now attacking universities, places of higher education, and they're attacking them because they want control over their how the operation is run. They want control over faculty, admissions. They have threatened universities, and many universities have kowtowed themselves to the administration, with the exception of Harvard. The Trump administration has threatened to remove their tax exemption, and they are now holding back or freezing $2.2 billion worth of grant funding. This is playing hardball, if you want to put it that way. And what becomes of it? Well, what's the after effect? And that is the more brazen the Trump administration is, certainly that affects faculties and the students, particularly those doing research and teaching. And those individuals that are being impacted by these brazen attack by the Trump administration, they're looking at other institutions in Canada, Europe, and Asia. So we're going to talk about that specifically today. And with me, I have my co-host, Ben Davis, professor of law at the University of Toledo. I have with me our special esteemed guest, David Larson, who is professor of law at the Hamlin, thank you, and Chuck Crumpton, our mediator extraordinaire, as always. So, gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for attending. And I would like to start off with, Ben, I'd like to go to you first, and maybe we'll just go around the table on this one question, and that is, what do you believe are behind these attacks on these universities, and specifically address Harvard?
The basic approach is broad-based across the country, which is to essentially gain control of any institution that might be a source of dissent or towards what they want to do, to really control the narrative, control the institutions. And so the decision by some institutions to comply with, or even comply in advance with what the administration has asked for, has been something that's encouraged them to keep going after more institutions. One interesting thing that happened is there was a memo prepared by the Harvard Negotiation Project about what a law firm should do. And they basically said, don't negotiate. And that memo came out, I think, on Sunday, or Saturday. And then on Monday, Harvard said, no. Or as Bishop Bullwinkle would say, hell no to the no. Okay. And that night, Lawrence O'Donnell wore his Harvard tie. I didn't know that he went to Harvard. It was very moving. So today, I decided to wear my regalia. I don't have a tie, just a little bit, to respect the president of that university, the university's decision to go. We'll go to the mats. We'll go with the mats. And the thing that's good about something like that is that there are grads in all these places that have complied, who are feeling their cowardice right now. And that's good for them, because the university that they went to has said no. So that's I can't tell you the number of people who've been moved by this, the fact that Harvard said no.
Well, I'm struck by it because Harvard produces a lot of attorneys, and good ones. And so, I mean, that's the target I wouldn't want to pick as far as a showdown in the courtroom. Yeah. Interesting. By the way, you look quite distinguished, and
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome very much. David, to you with the same question. What's your take on what's going on here with the universities? Do you agree with Ben, or do you have a different take on this?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry I didn't get the invitation to wear the academic regalia, so I apologize for being.
Well, I didn't get the memo either, so that's okay.
To be in civilian dress, but I think this is just one part of an overall strategy to kind of push the limits of presidential power. I mean, I think in every aspect conceivable, it seems like a limitless strategy for executive orders. I'm just going to push every envelope I can. And I'm going to try and seize control of every institution I can, academia being one of them, but only one among many. And I'm just going to try and assert as much control as I can because basically I admire people like um, Putin, Xi Jinping in China. I admire dictators and I want to have as comprehensive authority as I would like. It's incredibly disturbing. Um, for one of many reasons being the idea that there's almost no due process here in terms of a lot of these decisions being made. That's one of the fundamental ideas, I think, in our democracy is that we have a rule of law and people are entitled to due process. And things are happening that don't involve due process. We're getting seizures, and as we know, people are getting shipped off to foreign prisons. Um, and again, as an example of this intent to exercise as much power as possible, you've got a president saying that even though I can negotiate the acceptance of this person in El Salvador, I can't bring him back, and I'm not going to bring him back, and basically defying a court order. So it's really frightening.
Yeah.
These cancellations for visas for international students, they're approaching 5,000 now, where students uh, have records terminated at schools, and suddenly they have no, arguably, says the administration, no right to be here any longer once their records are erased at the school. Nature did a poll and they reported 75% of US based scientists are contemplating moving abroad because of funding cuts, immigration restrictions. There has long been studies in the United States, complaining about the fact that we don't have enough people moving into STEM areas of study, that we really need science and technology trained individuals. And we're relying significantly on um, foreign trained individuals or people who are coming here from foreign countries who are interested in the areas apparently that our students are not. Um, so when we think about the technology sector and the STEM sector, we really need trained and skilled immigrants who are now being moved out of the country. And even if they're not being individually moved out, the message is sent is that you're not welcome here. So if you're thinking about coming here, revise your plans, and that means this kind of this avenue we've had of international talent coming in is going to be closed off in the sense that people aren't going to want to come here anymore.
Yeah.
And
Let me follow up with I want to float a balloon here. You had mentioned, and I think Ben did as well, is that this is a power grab. Um, is this also a cultural issue? Remember in his first term, there was anti-elitism, institutions that, were defined as elitist. Is this also hand in hand with the cultural issues of the Trump administration to satisfy his MAGA base?
when you raise the question about how can people continue to support an individual who's implementing policies that hurt their own interests, which is happening throughout rural communities in particular now, and small businesses are just getting destroyed in the sense that as these tariffs are being implemented, the costs of engaging in a small business are going to be insurmountable. And there's going to be all kinds of small businesses closing. So you can kind of lay out the facts and say, why do you continue to support this individual when the policies are hurting you? The description has been put out that that's kind of a cult mentality, that people are reacting, it's identity based and emotional based. And it's like, this is the person with whom I identify most closely, and it's critical to my identity. And I'm not really thinking about the implications or consequences of the policies and the choices that I'm making. So, yeah, I think there's a lot in terms of like that cultural perspective and the idea that I'm so closely identified with this administration and this person that I appear not to be able to think very rationally about what's happened. At some point, it's going to be unavoidable.
Your views as to the effect of the funding freeze of grants, 2.2 billion for Harvard, the threat of removal of tax exemption for Harvard, and the tax on all these other universities. What's your viewpoint of the ultimate effect that we'll have either in the short term or the long term or both?
Well, I think Dave and Ben have alluded to it. I mean, all of these various aspects of this flood the zone attack on people that this probably mentally and emotionally deficient, certainly morally deficient person, and those who are loyal to him, um, literally subservient to him, they all fit together, and they are attacks. That's what narcissists do, and if you give them the power to do it, then they just go on a complete rampage, which is what this is. So if you're a parent thinking about educational directions for your child, if you're a teacher, if you're a community member, all of those things are impacted because it isn't just the chaos and the uncertainty. It's the physical, emotional, economic threat that is posed to every single person who stands up to it or is perceived to be less than fully subservient to it.
You know, Chuck, it seems to me, if I remember, one of the goals after World War II in 1945 was try to unify Europe so that they wouldn't be fighting against one another all the time. You know, we had the Marshall Plan trying to provide assistance so that, you know, Russia couldn't come in there and fill that void. But it seems to me since 1945, the United States used grant dollars to dedicate that to universities for research for a whole host of things, be it military research or, you know, science research. And that was how we kind of tried to keep ahead of Russia by funneling money to these higher institutions of learning, and that they would do the research and not so much the federal government. The federal government relied on these universities. Does that now throw us into a little bit of a chaotic situation with that research and perhaps the advancement of technologies and those technologies that that pertain to our national security?
Well, of course, because exactly what you're referring to was a very productive, collaborative, supportive building of alliances in which the higher education alliances, the research, the science alliances, the alliances that supported not only scientific development, economic development, but culture and the arts as well. That's all been reversed 180 degrees. Those are exactly what's under attack. And one of the things that's most disappointing is the extent of people in this country who actually enable and support those attacks.
Mm-hmm.
If you're thinking about your children and your children's future and their life choices, I don't understand how you can square those things.
Alrighty, thanks, Chuck. Ben, you know, I'm sure Trump and his loyal following feel that these attacks on universities are going to satisfy, getting rid of the woke idealism, the liberalism, all those things. Do you think for one moment that there is an unintended collateral damage here that's going to take place? Where are these professors going to go? Where are these research students going to go if these universities start cutting back on those activities? Are they going to go to Europe? Are they going to go to Canada? And to what extent does that provide damage or present damage to our advancement as a country? A brain drain, as the title suggested.
It is already happening. It is. It is happening. I know there, for example, Professor Timothy Snyder from Yale. He is now at the University of Toronto. Another professor at Yale has gone to the University of Toronto. I understand that the Max Planck Institute in Germany is getting lots of queries of people to come and work there, as well as the French CNRS. So the people moving out of the United States, both Americans and foreigners who are working here, is happening at a rapid pace right now. The second aspect of this is that the dialogue that you used to have of the intellectual, academic, scientific communities, foreigners are not coming anymore because of the what could potentially happen if they come to a conference and they, they're going to be allowed in to the United States or be detained and all the rest of it. They just don't do it. I mean, fortunately there's things like Zoom and all that, but the kind of close collaborations you can imagine, are rapidly disappearing. People are too scared to come here. They're just too scared. And in my head when you were talking, it reminded me of what happened in the 30s in Germany. That there were all kinds of essentially refugees from Germany, and then as things went further around Europe, who came to the United States and helped in many ways advance the United States on a whole series of developments, both in the scientific and otherwise. I just wanted to add one more thing about this guy, Abrego Garcia, who is El Salvadorian in El Salvador, right? So my godfather was Liberian in Liberia, and there was a coup, and he was put into an equivalent of a CCOT kind of place in Liberia at the time. And my father was a friend of his from college, and he contacted the former president of that college, Benjamin Mays, who had close contacts with President Carter. And President Carter asked the American ambassador to look into the case of this Liberian in Liberia and essentially saved my godfather's life in getting him out of Liberia into the States where he was a refugee until he passed away. So the things that you saw in that particular moment at the White House between the president of El Salvador and the president of the United States are simply false. They're simply false. There is possibilities for whatever reason for the states to work with each other to bring people back. I mean, let's think about the Americans who've been held in Russia and bringing them back. Russian Americans and all that stuff. I mean, there's a number of places where we've seen people being brought back, and so what we're seeing is a very awful, scary, what I call is trying to build what we call in the law the state of exception. That is, you have a whole series of laws, the Constitution, everything under that, but you say, sorry, there's such a crisis here, we can't apply those anymore. It's called a state of exception. And so in every kind of leader in many places that have gone autocratic has played that game. And in a state of exception, the kind of things of no due process, the kind of things of rounding up people on the streets, all that's happens. And they're trying to build a state of exception. While many people here in the United States are saying, no, you have to comply with the laws. If I could, for example, just on Harvard, there's a whole thing about Harvard having to do various things, being asked to do various things, and not doing enough about anti-Semitism. That was part of sort of the argument being made. And the professors at Harvard Law School, in their complaint as university professors, a union, they said, there are laws. There's the Civil Rights Act, which explains how you go through the procedures of dealing with issues of discrimination. And you comply with those. It's not some committee that starts to say things that makes you have to change what you do. If you have a complaint, you go through this legal procedure. So you see, even the effort of the letters is really trying to move to a state of exception where we don't follow the procedures that are actually the law that apply.
Yeah. Okay. David, do you buy the administration's farcical statement that this is all about stopping anti-Semitism? Number one. And two is, could you put yourself in the shoes of a student, a research student, and even before the attacks on these universities, those with green cards were possibly subject to immigration issues. Is it any safer for a student that has a student visa if people with green cards are being picked on.
Answer the first question is no.
Okay.
Don't buy it. I think that's just color for what's actually happening. I did want to comment on underscore something that both you, Tim, and Chuck mentioned, is that when we make the cuts to education and research, yes, on the one hand, it it kind of interrupts that research, so we don't get the products of that research that we may need. And for example, in the field of medical science, we might not be getting vaccines we would need for an evolving avian flu, or maybe a different treatment for measles or something like that. But additionally, in the area of science and research and education, it's just such a natural pathway for international collaboration. Um, you learn about people doing similar kinds of research in other countries, and people in academia, at least in my experience, are fairly open to collaboration. That collaboration results in a creation of a community, and the international community. And going back to the idea of the Marshall Plan and trying to create, break down barriers and avoid world wars. That kind of thing does break down barriers and creates an international community. So we lose that, when we interrupt these research programs. That kind of unconscious uh, contribution or result of those international collaborations of unifying the world, it begins to disappear. And that's really a very significant loss. Um, I think right now, if I'm an international student, I would pause to think about coming to the United States. And certainly, if I'm a parent, as you suggested, I'd pause because, again, the due process protections that we thought were in existence apparently aren't in existence right now. And it's very arbitrary. Um, People are being, yeah, I'm sure you've seen the video, people are being stopped on the street without identification, just kind of seized and marched off the street, and quickly shipped to Louisiana or a foreign country before anything can happen. And that the plan basically is that if I can get them out of U.S. territory fast enough, apparently, I can kind of say, well, I don't have any control anymore. And regardless of whether or not that move was mistaken or unlawful, doesn't really matter because it's out of my hands now. If that's
Yeah.
acceptable, nobody's protected. So that is very frightening.
It seems to me that a lot of corporations, and I remember Microsoft specifically, they went to the universities for all this research as they're developing their products, be it software or other things. They rely on university research. We're now in an environment where AI is just emerging, and there is a keen interest to keep competitive against China and their development of AI. To what degree will AI research be hampered by these attacks on universities, or is that a non-starter? Is that not even an issue that we're dealing with at this time?
Research grants are being terminated, that applications are being denied. I mean, speaking of AI, people are reviewing application grants for keywords. I mean, if you have the word diversity in your application grant, apparently you have no chance of getting it granted. Um, uh, but yeah, we're at a pivotal time. We talk about different revolutions in human history, and this whole idea of the advancement of artificial intelligence is akin to the Industrial Revolution. It's a turning point in human civilization. It's extremely important that we pay as much attention as possible to the evolution, not only to make the software progress as efficiently and effectively as possible, but also the ethical uses of it and whatever guardrails we need. Um, uh, we really need to establish, and we don't have them yet, about what are all the ethical parameters and what guardrails do we have for our own personal safety and confidentiality and privacy. So given that we're at this kind of critical point in human evolution, the idea that, oh, let's cut back on research and science and understanding in this field is insane.
Alrighty. Hey, Chuck, Harvard has $53 billion in its endowment. Uh, that's a lot of money. And although this 2.2 billion of grants being withheld, um, they're going to fight the fight. And they certainly look like they have the resources to do it. To what degree other universities are watching this, and will they step behind Harvard? or they just won't have the resources that Harvard has, and they'll capitulate to the Trump administration. Which way does this go?
That's going to be part of an interesting question. And I, I think one of the things that visually came to mind for me while David was talking about some of the impacts, the research, the collaborations, the networks that build up among educators and scientists and artists and others, and how valuable those are globally, not just nationally. My dad was head of cardiovascular research, heart research at the University of Wisconsin Hospitals back in the 1950s and 1960s. A number of his leading research people were from South Asia, from Europe, from South America, Central America, other parts. It was wonderful to meet and to get to know and to work with those people and the networks that built up. If you ask the question, say, if we subtract from all of the research progress in science, in other fields that we've seen over the last 50, 60, 70 years, all of those who are not white, male, US citizens, what do we have left? I think Bill Gates and Tim Cook of Apple and the others would be the first ones to tell you, not very much.
Well, they've been big supporters of visas that allow employees from around the world to come and add to the corporations.
Because it works. Those teams work. Those alliances work. You can either build those alliances and support them and reward them, or you can attack them. And we're now in the attack mode.
Mm-hmm. Well, Silicon
The
Valley
impact of that is going to be inevitably destructive.
We're almost out of time. Ben, I just want to talk to you about a parallel avenue here, and that is the law firms. I'm thinking of Perkins Coie out of Seattle. They're not going to put up with it. They're going to stand up to Trump. Do other law firms follow Perkins Coie, or do they follow Harvard and say, this was a point in time where some law firms, big law firms, capitulated in New York, and maybe the timing is right that we stand tall and stand on our own hind legs. How does this go for law firms, and is there a parallel track with the University with Harvard University?
Yeah, this is one more aspect of the effort of control by going after the largest law firms first, because no one has any sympathy. First, nobody knows who these are really on average, who these firms are. You just sort of have to be in the know to know who they are. And they look like these sort of big behemoths. Who would care about any of them? But one of the things about a lot of these law firms is that they do have significant pro bono work that they've done on behalf of destitute people and all. So by basically carving out these top law firms, one of the results is that you're all conflicted out on a whole range of things related to any effort to bring a claim against the government. They're part of the government now. They've got a conflict. And so it really is opening up a space for more oppression. So within the law firms, it's really either you don't negotiate, or if you do negotiate, what happens is they keep asking for more. I mean, because they see that you will bend the knee a little, so let's bend the knee some more and keep going until you're just an appendage. Now, fascinating things happen. Like you have associates in law firms who are really shocked by this. Some of them have resigned in protest in their firms. And the interesting thing was, I think there were like 1,500 associates who've written letters, written or joined a letter contesting what happened. But here's the thing: they signed it anonymously, right? So already, just by putting it anonymous, they bent the knee just a little bit because of their fear for their career. You see, it's that, and they say, "Oh, look, we got them to sign anonymously. That's we got a little angle on them, so to speak." So yes, there's the logic, the classic logic of a firm is that I have to do this to save the firm, right? Or and that's what you'll get the rationalization for people to be compliant with whatever in advance with whatever the administration says. But on the other hand, there are people who look at the downside, or law firms that look at the downstream consequences for them of doing this, and they just concluded that it's not worth it, and so they're pushing back. And one of the interesting things about saying no is that you watch this pressure being placed on you. You see the different levers they try to place on you, right? To try to make you comply. I think I saw something recently where I guess the press secretary was saying that Harvard should apologize to President Trump, right? That could, it's like the insanity that you're dealing with on one side is something that by saying no, it is revealed. You see, and that's what I think is fascinating about watching this, is who's going to bow and who is not, and what is the rationalization for those who bow, because there are a lot of people who will just go along to get along.
Well, we saw that with the media first, and now we're seeing it with universities and law firms. All right, let's wrap up here. I'm going to go around the table. Ben, what's your final thoughts on this topic?
Final thoughts is recognizing this effort to make us all fearful, right? The only countering emotion that I've found that really helps is the motion of indignation. Is it, it's like, this is not acceptable in America. I think that is a strong thing in America. And to the extent that indignation is allowed to blossom in our country, then people will fight back. But I recognize that many people are fearful. If I was a foreigner in the United States, I wouldn't say a word about anything anymore because they have a hook. I was a foreigner in France for 17 years. I didn't say anything about French politics while I was there because they had a hook, which is get rid of my card and I'm gone. But it's on us as citizens to do what's necessary to make sure that those people are protected. That's a duty on us, so to speak.
I don't know if you saw the video clip of Senator Chuck Grassley in his town home meeting. They gave him hell in Iowa.
Yeah.
So good for them. David, your final thoughts.
I think that obviously that the targeting of the universities right now is about control. I'm trying to control the universities, but we also have an administration that's bragging about how it's going to cut back on federal spending. So to the degree that they're not distributing research grants, they can say, oh, this is us being responsible and true to our word about cutting back on federal spending and reducing the national debt. The Wall Street Journal just finished looking at Treasury Department data. And what they've discovered is that Trump has already spent $155 billion more than Biden did during the same period after their inauguration. So $155 billion more. Elon Musk is claiming to have saved $150 billion. Even if that's true, that means that Trump has spent more than $5 billion in the same period of time, increased the debt more than the Biden administration, number one. Number two, it's becoming very apparent that Doge has not saved $150 million. Those reports are full of errors. So this whole idea that, yeah, I can justify cutting back on these grants and the spending because that's really consistent with the promise I made and the reason you elected me to cut back on federal spending and debt. It's just not happening. The debt is being increased under Trump. The savings aren't being enacted, and this is all being done in the backdrop of a tax bill that'll reduce the debt, estimated $5.7 trillion.
Right.
So this whole idea that what's happening here in education is only part of a larger plan to balance the federal budget is just a complete fallacy.
Yeah. Wasn't Elon Musk's promise of $2 trillion? He was going to find $2 trillion in savings. Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, that's not going to happen.
Right.
All righty. Chuck. Thank you, David, by the way. Chuck, you get the final word here.
Ben has always been admirably, elegantly, eloquently articulate. And there's a phrase that he's come up with that I've really taken to heart, and I think, and I wish we all could. It's what we do together that can make a difference. The question is whether the people in this country who can come together and make that difference are going to push to build those alliances, to keep those alliances, to expand those alliances that enable us to learn to connect and to go forward with better health, with better education, with better well-being. That's what's under attack. It's going to hit and people are going to feel it.
Good point. I'd like to thank my special esteemed guests, David Larson, Chuck Crumpton, and last but not least, I'd like to thank my co-host, Ben Davis. Ben, you've graduated with honors, and please, if you wish, flip your tassel. Thank you. And with that, I'm Tim Apicella with American Issues Take One. Please join us next week, and until then, aloha.